Hare Krishna. Can you hear me?
Recording in progress.
Skunaj, I can hear you.
And you're the translator this evening?
Yes, Skunaj.
Okay.
Yes, Skunaj.
Okay. Where are you, anyways?
Oh, I'm in Wuhan.
You're in Wuhan. Okay.
Skunaj, I noticed that the font in Chinese font in PPT is quite different from mine.
Well, I didn't change it. I don't know how to use Chinese fonts. Should I move over to here? Then it looks better?
Yes, Skunaj.
Okay.
This is better.
Okay. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachadine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Satarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This is our final session for discussing the flow of Srimad Bhagavatam for the first 6 cantos.
这是我们对圣典博伽瓦坛1到6篇，这圣典博伽瓦坛的头6篇的这个串讲的最后一个部分。
Obviously, part of the purpose is to give you a picture of what the first 6 cantos look like, what they made up of.
显而易见，我们通过串讲圣典博伽瓦坛1到6篇，来给大家一个整体的画面，去了解前6篇的整个框架看上去是怎样的。
At the same time, a second purpose is to inspire you to systematically study Srimad Bhagavatam.
还有第二个目的，也是为了激励大家能够非常系统的去研习圣典博伽瓦坛。
This evening, we'll be discussing the 6th canto in a summary way.
今天晚上我们来概述一下圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇的内容。
During the national holiday in China, we had 14 classes covering what we're going to cover now in an hour and a half.
我们现在会以1个半小时的时间来概述一下我们在中国的国庆节期间花了14节课的内容，讲述的内容。
We will obviously not be going into so many details as we did previously.
当然了，我们不会像国庆节期间讲圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇那样详细的、细致的去讲述。
For those of you that heard the entire 6 cantos in detail, this will just serve as a refresher to your memory.
那么在座的当中，有已经在国庆节期间非常详细的聆听了圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇的内容的奉献者。那么今天晚上的课程呢，就是在让你们去重新回忆一下当时所讲述的内容。
When Srila Prabhupada was writing Srimad Bhagavatam, he gave a title to each of the 12 cantos.
当须帕帕德在翻译整部圣典博伽瓦坛的过程当中，他对圣典博伽瓦坛的每一篇都给予了一个标题。
Prescribed Duties for Mankind was the title he gave for Canto 6.
须帕帕德为圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇给予的标题是人类的父定职责，或者是人类的天职。
In the image on the right side of the screen, you see the form of Krishna and the 12 cantos of the Bhagavatam are depicted on either side.
在我们幻灯片上所看到的右边的这个图片，中间是 Krishna 的形象。那么在 Krishna 的两边是圣典博伽瓦坛第12篇的图片。
Srila Prabhupada explains that Canto 6 represents the chest of the Lord.
释帕帕德说到了，圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇代表着主的胸膛。
Please read.
Yes。第6篇代表主的胸膛，人类的父定职责，主要以 Posana 即主给他的奉献者提供保护这一主题为核心，即便他们有时不经意的违反 Dharma 律法。
You may remember when we discussed Canto 2, there Shukadeva Goswami lists the 10 topics of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam.
大家可能还记得，当我们讨论圣典博伽瓦坛第2篇的时候，舒克德维戈斯瓦米在圣典博伽瓦坛第2篇罗列了圣典博伽瓦坛所讲述的10个主题的名称。
One of those 10 topics is Poshana.
而这10个主题当中的一个是 Posana。
Poshana means protection.
Posana 的意思是保护。
Those who abide by Dharma are protected by Dharma.
那些遵守 Dharma 律法的人会受到 Dharma 的保护。
However, Para-Dharma or transcendental Dharma even supersedes Dharma.
那么这个超然的 Dharma 或 Para-Dharma， 它甚至超然于 Dharma 之上。
What does Dharma mean?
Dharma 是什么意思呢？
Dharma means duties for mankind. That's the canto.
Dharma 的意思是人类的负定职责的意思，也就是博伽瓦坛第6篇的标题。
Then what is para-dharma or transcendental duty?
那 Para-Dharma 或者是超然的职责又是什么呢？
Para-dharma is making one's connection with Krishna the purpose of one's life.
Para-Dharma 意思是使一个人与至尊人格守神至尊人格守神连接在一起，而这就是人类生命的目标。
In the first 3 chapters, we're going to hear about the story of Ajamila.
在头3章里面，我们会了解到阿姜密勒的故事。
Ajamila made some transgression in Dharma, but he engaged in chanting Narayana, even he was meaning his son, and that's para-dharma.
阿姜密勒他在他生命的一个阶段的时候，他违反了 Dharma 这个职责，人类的职责，但是他在他念诵了 Narayana 的名字，虽然他念诵 Narayana 名字的时候指的是他的儿子，但是念诵 Narayana 的名字本身就是超然的 Dharma。
In this way, even Ajamila transgressed Dharma. Unintentionally, he engaged in para-dharma and he was protected.
即便阿姜密勒他违反了 Dharma 职责，人类的父亲的职责，但是他无意之中履行了 Para-Dharma， 所以他仍然受到了 Para-Dharma 的保护。
The rest of Canto 6 covers the same principle.
而圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇剩下的这些章节就讲述了这个原则。
So let us begin. Canto 6.
那我们现在开始进入到圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇的内容。
Please read.
Yes。慈悲为怀的 Pariksit 询问 Shukadeva Goswami， 沦落到地狱受苦的生物体如何能得到救赎？ Shukadeva Goswami 回答时，讲述了阿姜密勒的 阿伽米勒在死亡之际吟诵圣主的圣名的力量所在。这吟诵全然保护奉献者免于 Yamaraj 的带领之手。
You see in the drawing in the upper left, there's Ajamila calling out, Narayana, Narayana, as the Yamadutas are taking away to the abode of the Lord of Death.
我们在这个图片的左上方看到的这个莲花瓣里面的图片是 Ajamila 在他这个 Yamaduta Yamaraj 的使者们去把他要抓到死亡的殿堂 Yamaraj 的殿堂上去的时候，他大声的疾呼了 Narayana Narayana。
And that's the lesson from the first 3 chapters.
这就是圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇前3章所要讲述的内容。
Canto 6 of Srimad Bhagavatam follows Canto 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam.
那么，圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇，它是继圣典博伽瓦坛第5篇来呈现出来的。
Canto 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam describes Vedic cosmology, the structure of the universe.
圣典博伽瓦坛第5篇里面也讲述了这个宇宙的伟大的宇宙论，或者是讲这伟大的宇宙论、宇宙的结构。
The final section of those 11 chapters discusses the Hellish planets.
而在圣典博伽瓦坛第5篇的最后的章节11个章节里面，描述最后的一个章节里面描述了地狱星宿。
Now remember, Maharaj Parikshit has only recently been the king of the whole world, and he's concerned about the well-being of his citizens.
请大家记住 ，Maharaj Parikshit 他以前是整个宇宙的是整个宇宙的帝王，他那个时候，所以自然而然的对宇宙中的生物体是非常关心的。
When he hears about the hellish planets, he wants to know, oh no, how to help my citizens become free from having to enter into that hellish region if they've been sinful.
当 Parikshit Maharaj 一听到关于地狱星宿的描述的时候，他就非常的关心起来。哎呀，我的臣民们如果从事了罪恶的活动，那怎么能够让他们免于堕入到地狱星宿呢？得到救赎呢？
In response to this question, Shukadev gives 3 levels of answers.
为了回答这个问题，Sukadeva Goswami 从3个方面、3个层面回答了这个提问。
Those 3 levels of answers correspond to different sections of the Vedas.
而 Sukadeva Goswami 根据这3个层面所给予的回答，跟整个伟达经的每一个部分是相对应的。
One very substantial section of the Vedas is called Karma Kanda.
伟达经非常多的一个部分呢，被称为 Karma Kanda。
Karma Kanda recommends prescribed duties for people to become successful in their material life and elevated after this life.
Karma Kanda 业报之部呢，推荐的是让人们去尽职尽责的履行人类的职责，在物质生活上有着非常圆满的这个处境。与此同时呢，又能够逐渐的提升到这神知觉的层面上。
Even persons who are very sincere about striving for elevated behavior and consciousness will make mistakes.
即便是一个人，他在物质的层面上是非常崇高的，在物质方面是处在非常崇高的层面上，但是他仍然也会犯错。
We all make mistakes.
我们大家都犯错，人非圣贤，孰人无过。
And when you make a mistake, you're responsible for the consequences of that mistake.
当我们犯错的时候，那我们就得为自己犯错的结果负责任。
And in terms of karma, it means accepting reactions for those mistakes.
那么关于这个 karma， 那一个人就会遭受这个犯错的结果。
Therefore, in the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas, it prescribes systems for atoning for those mistakes. And then they're cleansed.
因此，在韦达经的业报之部 Karma Kanda 里面就规定了赎罪的进行忏悔赎罪的各种途径，如此一个人就能够从中受到净化。
Making a reference to this section of the Vedas, Shukadeva Goswami says, if you've done sins, you can atone for those sins, and then you're cleansed.
Shukadeva Goswami 他引述了韦达经的业报之部相关的部分，来回答了 Parikshit Maharaj 的提问，说道：如果一个人犯了错或者是行恶了，他可以根据韦达经的业报之部的赎罪苦行的方式去忏悔，去净化自己的罪恶。
Here's what Shukadeva Goswami says. Please read.
在这里 Shukadeva Goswami 是这样说到的：通过从事规定的赎罪的途径，人在死后不会沦落到地狱。
Maharaj Parikshit has an objection to this answer.
Maharaj Parikshit 反对了，对这个回答提出了反对意见。
He compares the process of atonement to an elephant's bathing.
Maharaj Parikshit 把赎罪的途径比喻为是大象的沐浴。
After bathing thoroughly in a lake or river, the elephant goes to the side of the river, takes dust from the side of the river, and throws the dust all over his body again.
大象在湖水之中痛痛快快的沐浴之后，它回到岸上，然后又用鼻子卷起岸上的这个泥土或沙子，撒在身上，满身都是。
Maharaj Parikshit compares atonement to an elephant's bathing.
所以 Maharaj Parikshit 把赎罪的途径比喻为是大象的沐浴。请哪位妈大姐把你的麦关上好吗？谢谢。
While
Sorry.
atonement clears the reaction, sinful propensity remains and one is likely to do the same bad thing or mistake again.
在这里面说到了，即便是一个人进行了赎罪，经历了这个赎罪，但是呢，他内心行恶的倾向还会遗留在内心，因为这个内心的从事罪恶的倾向还遗留在内心，所以他日后还会重蹈覆辙。
Here's what Parikshit says. Please read.
在这里 Parikshit Maharaj 是这样说到的，但是罪恶的倾向还会留在内心，因此我认为赎罪是没有用的。
Shukadeva Goswami appreciates his reply, says, very good, very good. You listened very carefully. This is exactly what I taught you earlier.
Shukadeva Goswami 听了他的回答之后，非常欣赏他的这个回答，说道：“你说的很好，说的很好，这正是我前面所告诉你的内容。你非常仔细的聆听了我前面所讲述的。”
Then Shukadeva Goswami moves to another section of the Vedas.
然后 Shukadeva Goswami 便行进到了韦达经的另一个部分。
Then he recommends the path of knowledge.
于是他推荐了知识的途径。
If you know better, then the tendency to do sinful things, there's a chance it can be corrected or checked.
内心的这种从事罪恶的倾向还留在那里的话，那么这里还有另外一个机会可以予以纠正。
But that is also incomplete.
但是这个途径也是不完整的。
You can know better and still do some foolish thing.
你可以仍然还会去做那些傻事儿。
Therefore, Shukadeva moves on to the third category of understanding within the Vedas, and that's devotional service.
于是苏克列夫哥斯阿米便行进到了韦达经的另外一个部分，而这个部分更是推荐的从事分爱服务。
There is a potency within devotional service that can completely take away even tendency for bad behavior.
分爱服务本身便具有这样的力量，甚至能够根除掉一个人行恶的倾向或者是欲望。
Please read.
Yes， 我亲爱的国王，如果罪恶的人服务主的一位真正奉献者，从而学到如何将生命奉献于 Krishna 的莲花族，他就能彻底的受到净化。
Again, read.
Yes， 只是通过苦修苦练、保持遵守和践行其他赎罪方法，仍无法得到净化。
Shukadeva Goswami compares the bhakti process to the sun dissipating fog.
苏克列夫哥斯阿米将分爱的程序比喻为太阳，正就像是太阳立即驱散了雾霭一样。
In northern parts of China, there's more common experience of fog than in the southern parts of China.
在中国的北边，是不是冬天的时候会比南方更多的看到就是雾霭的这些现象啊？
This photograph is fog that's seen in the early morning, but the fog is immediately dissipated when the sun shines directly upon the fog. It's gone, poof.
Yes， 当我们在这个图片上可以看到，这是黎明前的时候雾蒙蒙的景象。那么当太阳一升起来的时候，太阳的阳光立刻就驱散了雾霭这些雾气，一下子就驱散了。
Here's the verse from 6th Canto.
这是圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇第1章第15诗节里面讲到的，唯有全心全意为 Krishna 从事纯粹奉爱服务的罕有之人，能够根除罪恶活动的杂草，使其没有死灰复燃的可能。他只是通过践行奉爱服务，便可以做到这一点，就像太阳能以自身的光辉立刻驱散雾霭。
Some of you may like to learn verses.
有一些奉献者特别喜欢去学习这些梵文诗节，
This is a really good verse to learn.
这是我们学习记忆的一个非常非常好的诗节。
You see in the second line, Vasudeva Parayana.
你们在这个诗节的第2行可以看到这一句 Vasudeva Parayana。
This phrase appears several times within the course of the 6th canto.
这句话在圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇里面反复出现了好几次。
We can understand from that it's the theme of the canto.
我们从中就可以看到，这正是圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇所要讲述的主要的题。
This is a devotional service with complete absorption in the object, Vasudeva, Krishna.
我们可以了解到，这正是圣典博伽瓦坛整部所讲述的主要的内容，那就是使一个人完全专注于对 Vasudeva 或 Krishna 的奉爱服务当中。
Such devotional service has the power to completely remove sin, which is the word agham in the 3rd line.
这样 除所有的罪恶倾向或者欲望的力量。
The
这
re-
是第三行，这个罪恶 agam，
The word agham or sin is compared to fog.
而 agam 这个词的中文意思是罪恶 agam， 罪恶是在这里被比喻为雾霭。
It's a metaphor. It's something that's compared that's within our experience to something that's outside of our experience.
那这是一个比喻。那么我们在这里通过我们在日常生活当中所能够经历到的一些事物的现象来做比喻，让我们去理解或者是体验我们的这个经历以外的事情。
It's within our experience, at least many people have experienced, fog all of a sudden at once just disappearing when the direct rays of the sun hit the fog.
这是大家人人都能够经历到的，我们都经历过雾的这一现象。那么当太阳一升起的时候，太阳的本身的光辉就能够立刻驱散雾霭，
Many
驱散迷雾，这是我们每个人所经历过的。
Many of us have experienced that.
我们很多人都有这样的经历。
Devotional service that's of this elevated standard has a very similar power. Completely, sins are removed, and even the tendency is removed by that bhakti.
当一个人他从事这样非常崇高的纯粹的奉爱服务的境界当中，立刻他心中所有的这些从事罪恶的倾向全都被拔除掉了。
Many of you have done gardening, grown flowers or vegetables in your garden.
在座的可能有一些奉献者有这种园艺的体验，做过这个养花草，或者是去铲除花园里的杂草这样的经历。
It's not sufficient to just cut the tops of the weeds when the roots of the weeds are still in the ground.
那么如果只是把杂草的泥土上面的部分剪除掉还不够，必须把杂草的根铲除掉。
These other processes, atonement and knowledge, is like clipping the tops of a weed when the root is still there.
而这个忏悔的途径，或者是获得知识的途径，都比喻为只是把杂草的泥土上面的这个部分去除掉了，而没有铲除杂草的根部。
Tending to your garden requires that you pull the weeds out from their roots.
那么，当我们去这个养花草的时候，我们就需要把杂草的根部连根拔掉。
Then the flowers or vegetables or whatever you want to grow can grow nicely without disturbance.
那么，无论你种的是花草还是蔬菜，当你把杂草的根部连根拔除掉之后，这些花草、树木或者是蔬菜就能够茁壮成长。
That same metaphor is in this verse.
所以，这个世界当中呢，就运用了这相同的一个比喻。
Sinful action is compared to weeds.
罪恶的活动被比喻为是杂草。
An attentive gardener will pull the weed from its root, and similarly, a devotee will pull from its root the tendency for sinful activity.
那这个园丁他应该把杂草连根拔除。同样的，从事奉爱服务的奉献者们也应该连根拔除掉从事罪恶活动的欲望或者是倾向。
The method is unalloyed devotion.
而在这里，途径就是从事纯粹的奉爱服务。
And this unalloyed devotion is the process of complete or real atonement that leads to real knowledge.
而纯粹奉爱服务这一途径，正是真正的赎罪，使人获得真正的知识。
When one is connected with Krishna like this, one is not attracted to worldly pursuits.
当一个人如此被 Krishna 所吸引，他不再会去追求那些物质的对象了。
Please read.
Yes. 为了证实奉爱服的力量，舒克德布苏阿米讲述了阿伽米勒的生平。
The place where Ajamila lived is still existing today in India.
阿伽米勒当时所住的地方呢，至今仍然在印度存在着。
Some of you came with us to attend the yatra in visiting Ayodhya.
在座的一些奉献者们，可能曾经跟我们一起去拜访过阿尤迪亚。
And Ayodhya is very near to the city of Lucknow.
阿尤迪亚离洛克劳特别近。
And we stayed there when we visited Ayodhya.
当我们去拜访阿尤迪亚的时候，我们在那里停留过。
And not far from that place is the present-day Kanauj, which during his time it was called Kanyakubja.
那么离那个地方不远，也就是现在的 Kanauj 这个地方不远的，有一个地方就叫做 Kanyakubja，就是原来阿伽米勒所住的 Kanyakubja。
There we see a painting of a young Brahmin boy, Ajamila.
在这个图片上面，我们可以看到阿伽米勒年轻的时候的样子。
He grew up in Kanyakubja,
他是在康亚古贾长大的，
and he was trained by his parents to do all nice things that Brahmin boys learn.
他在父母的训练下从事了 Brahmana 的各种活动，成为了一个优秀的婆罗门。
Please read.
Yes， 在父母的训练下，他成为了研习伟大经的完美婆罗门，
And
并且他遵守了所有的规范原则。
however, in the course of his activities as a young married man, he became attracted to a prostitute.
然而不知怎地，当他是一个成婚的，当他长大成婚，后来他被一位妓女所吸引。
Read.
Yes， 由于他的过去，这位年轻的婆罗门不知怎地被一名妓女吸引，他变得最为堕落，背弃了所有规范原则。
The circumstance was, one day he was engaged by his father in gathering materials in the forest needed for performing yajna or sacrifice.
当时的情况是这个样子的：这位年轻的婆罗门在他父亲的命令下，去到森林里采集那些举行祭祀所需要的那些物品。
As he was gathering wood and flowers and other items for the yajna, this is the scene that he saw.
当他采集这些木材或者是鲜花的时候，还有其他的一些用来做祭祀的其他的物品的时候，他看到了这一幕，就是荧幕上的这一幕。
There was a prostitute and a low-class man. They were both drunk, and they were doing what those kind of people do together.
那当时呢，有一个女子，还有一个当地的一个男子，他们两个人喝得醉醺醺的，拥抱在一起。
He had never seen anything like that before.
年轻的阿伽米勒婆罗门当时在此之前从来没有见过这一幕，
He never went to a movie theater.
他从来就没去过电影院，
He didn't watch television.
他也不看电视，
He didn't read any modern magazines.
他也不
These media today is filled with all this stuff.
当今的媒体呢，充满了在荧幕上的这一幕的各种话题。
But he was very innocent. He had never seen anything like this before.
当时年轻的加密了婆罗门，他非常的天真无邪，在此之前他从来没看到这样的事情。
So the impression went into his mind.
但是呢，这一幕却深深的印在了他的脑海里。
And when he went back to his home, he couldn't get that impression off his mind.
当他又回到家的时候，他脑子里念念不忘他所看到的那一幕。
We know from Bhagavad-Gita that there's a very natural sequence from contemplating objects of the senses.
我们从《佛家梵歌》里面了解到了有这样的一系列的一个先后的这样的一个过程。当一个人念念不忘当一个人他心思他的这个对象的时候，感官的对象的时候，
From contemplating objects of the senses, one develops some attachment for that object.
当一个人内心想着感官的对象的时候，他就会对感官的对象产生依恋。
In that contemplation, the mind tends to become bewildered.
当一个人心系这个感官的对象，就会对此产生依恋，然后念念不忘，于是他的心意就会迷惑。
Gradually, as the mind becomes bewildered, intelligence is lost.
逐渐的，当心意被迷惑了之后，智慧就会丧失。
And one then falls down into the pool of the material energy.
逐渐，一个人就会堕入到物质能量的泥潭之中。
This is a little chart showing the sequence of Ajamila's fall down.
在这个里面，就是阿伽密了堕落的这样的前因后果的一个顺序。
He saw an illicit affair.
他看到了淫乱之事，
In his mind, lust awakened.
在他的心意当中、内心当中激起了色欲，被激起来了。
He became illusioned.
于是他受到迷惑，
He tried to control his senses.
他千方百计的试图控制感官，
He tried to remember teachings from the scriptures,
他千方百计的试图铭记经典，
but his lust was too strong and he couldn't control his senses.
但是他的色欲是如此的强烈，乃至于他控制不住他的感官。
He then became a victim of Cupid.
于是他成为了丘比特的牺牲品，
He lost all good sense,
于是他失去了所有的理智，
and he then began contemplating on the prostitute and eventually lived with the prostitute.
因此他念念不忘那名妓女，最后与这位妓女同居。
His wife couldn't bear that kind of life, and so she left. So there he is alone with the prostitute.
他的好妻子无法容忍自己的丈夫和妓女同居在一起，于是他的妻子离开了家。
He gave up all his Dharma practices.
就这样，阿伽密了背弃了婆罗门，背弃了达玛的职责，婆罗门的达玛。
Whatever wealth he had was squandered.
无论他有什么样的财富，他全都挥霍掉。
He gave up his respectable wife.
并且他抛弃了他可敬的妻子。
Now he has children with this prostitute and he has to maintain them.
现在他和这个妓女又生下了孩子，于是他要养家糊口，维系这些孩子。
And he had no proper means to maintain them, so he became a criminal, a thief.
但是呢，他又没有正当的途径去养家糊口，于是他过着不负责任的生活，去从事各种罪恶。
His life became completely irresponsible.
他的生活完全是不负责任的。
And all scriptural regulations were overlooked.
他完全的忽略或违反了启示经典的 这些规范原则。
According to Srimad Bhagavatam, he lived until he was 88 and he was completely attached to the prostitute and the children that came from the prostitute.
在圣典博伽瓦坛是这样描述的：他后来变得非常的老迈，那会儿他已经88岁了，并且呢，十分的依附他的这个妓女，并且也十分依附他和妓女生下的孩子们。
Here's a Bhagavad-Gita illustration that pictures the sequence same.
这是圣典博伽瓦坛所描述的一个人堕落的过程，先后的顺序是怎样的？
In the upper left, it shows a young man contemplating the objects of the senses.
在这个幻灯片的最上面，我们可以看到一名男子，他内心念念不忘感官的对象，一名年轻的女子。
Next is attachment and then lust.
于是他心生依恋，对这名女子产生依恋，心中激起了色欲。
Then comes acting on the lust, and the mind becomes bewildered, intelligence is lost, and he goes to a hellish situation at the bottom.
于是他沉迷于这样的色欲之中，然后他的心意被迷惑了，理智失去了智慧，逐渐的堕入到地狱当中。
So Ajamila lost all his good qualities in the prostitutes' association.
由于阿伽米了和这名妓女有染，跟他的联谊，所以他丧失了所有的这些好品质。
He committed many sins to maintain his family.
他从事了各种各样的罪恶来养家糊口。
88 years of his life passed in this way.
就这样，88个年头过去了。
He had 10 sons,
他一共生了10个儿子。
and by Super Soul's encouragement, he named the youngest son Narayana.
后来，由于内心抽灵的激励，他将他最小的儿子起名为 Narayana。
And naturally, he was attached to his youngest son.
自然而然的，他对他最小的儿子十分的依附。
Death was approaching.
就这样，死亡迫在眉睫。
At death, he began thinking exclusively of his son.
在死亡来临之际，他完全只想着他自己的那个小儿子。
Because he had been very sinful, the Yamadutas came to take him away.
因为阿伽米了，他是无恶不作，非常的罪恶，所以在他死亡的时候，亚麻都塔的亚麻拉吉的使者来到他面前。
When the Yamadutas came, he was terrified and he cried out very loudly for his son.
当亚麻都他们来到他面前的时候，他害怕极了，于是他就大声疾呼他儿子的名字。
Please read.
Yes， 阿伽米呢在死亡之际，亚麻拉吉面目狰狞的执行官们前去捉拿他。接着，他害怕的大声呼喊 Narayana 的名字，因为他十分依附他的小儿子。
There's his little son,
我们在这个图片上可以看到他的小儿子，
and there's one of the Yamadutas taking him away.
在这个图片上也看到亚麻多查也将他要捉拿走。
He was very afraid.
阿伽米呢非常的害怕，
In fear, he called for his son.
害怕之极，大声疾呼他儿子的名字。
Now, how is his little son going to help him? But he was attached, and so that's where his mind went, and that's where his mouth went.
那这个小男孩怎么能够救他呢？但是阿伽米呢，当时他的内心就是这么想着，一心想着他的这个小儿子，
When
所
he,
以他口里也叫出了他小儿子的名字。
although he was not intending to call Lord Narayana sent his messengers to stop the Yamadutas.
虽然阿伽米呢，当时他的目的并 断主。但即便如此，至尊主仍然派遣了他的使者 Vishnudutta 去到阿迦密勒面前，赶走了 Yamadutta。
Notice in the painting, there's some ropes pulling his subtle body from the gross body.
我们在这个图片上可以看到 Yamadutta 们当时手拿着绳索，把阿迦密勒的精微的身体从他粗糙的身体当中拽走。
The same thing is shown in this painting. Those are subtle ropes pulling the subtle body from the gross body.
这同样的照片，同样的这幅照片呢，就讲述了这同一个场景。我们可以看到Yamadutta 们他们手中的精微的绳索正在把阿迦密勒的精微的躯体从他的粗糙的躯体当中拽出来。
And the Vishnuduttas order, stop.
Vishnudutta 们，Vishnu 的使者们，让他们住手。
As you see, there's many paintings of this event.
我们可以看到，这是对同一个场景的许多图片的描述。
One obvious lesson is there's a difference between the subtle body and the gross body.
毫无显而易见，精微的躯体跟粗糙的躯体是有所区别的。
At the time of death, the gross body is left behind, the subtle body and the soul go somewhere.
那在时间一到的时候，这个死亡来临的时候，粗糙的躯体便被流了下来，死亡掉。那但是这个精微的躯体包裹着灵魂，会去到别处。
If one has been sinful, and if one has not undergone atonement, then they're to be taken to Yamaraj.
如果一个人他罪恶滔天，并且没有从事任何的赎罪的话，他就会被带到 Yamaraj 的殿堂上。
Ajamila had been sinful, and Ajamila hadn't undergone atonement, so he's a candidate for being taken by the Yamaduttas.
而加密了他十恶不赦，他从事了无恶不作，并且呢没有做任何的赎罪，所以他是被 Yamadutta 带到 Yamaraj 的殿堂上的人选。
However, Ajamila had done para dharma by calling the name Narayana.
然而，加密了通过呼唤 Narayana 的圣名而从事了 Paradharma。
And therefore, the Vishnuduttas came.
因此 Vishnudutta、Vishnu 主 Vishnu 的执行官们来到了他的面前。
The painting on the right is showing a bird in a cage.
在这个图片的右边，我们可以看到笼子里关着一只鸟。
And that's meant to indicate the cage is like the body, and the bird inside is the soul, carried away by the subtle body.
而这个图面呢，就会告诉我们的是，这个鸟笼子呢，就像是我们的粗糙的躯体，关在里面的鸟是这个灵魂。那么当人死亡来临的时候，这个精微的躯体包裹着灵魂会被带走。
In the context of this event, there's some teachings.
在这件事情发生，以这件事情发生的背景当中呢，我们从中可以学习到这样的教导。
The teachings are found in a conversation between the Yamaduttas at the top there and the Vishnuduttas pictured at the bottom.
而这个教导呢，我们是能够从 Yamadutta， 就是这张幻灯片上面的这几个人物，他们是 Yamadutta 和下面的 Vishnudutta 他们之间的对话当中，能够学习到这些教导。
The Yamaduttas are shocked.
Yamadutta 看上去青面獠牙，面目狰狞。
Who has ever defied death? Who can stop us? We're the agents of the Lord of Death. Who are you?
这亚麻都他们在那里说到了，你们是谁？你们竟然能阻止我们去执行亚麻拉吉的命令？
Here's what they say. Please read.
这是亚麻都他们当时说的一番话。你们是谁？竟敢挑战亚麻拉吉的管辖权？你们为何烦厌我们？
Read.
你们从哪里来？你们的主人是谁？你们看起来很正派，但为何行为不当呢？
So the Yamadutas ask questions first.
所以亚麻都他们首先问了一系列的问题。
At the bottom, the Vishnudutas say, we'll answer your questions, but we want you first to answer our questions.
Vishnu 都他们就是下面的这几位人物。Vishnu 都他们说到了，我们会回答你们的问题，但是首先你们要来听一听，我们要问你们的问题。
You say that you're representatives of Yamaraj,
你们说你们是 Yamaraji 的代表，
and therefore Yamaraj, being the Lord of Dharma, you should know what is Dharma.
那 Yamaraji 他是 Dharma 之主，那么你们就应该知道什么是 Dharma 了。
When you serve a master, you should know the teachings of the master.
当你们服务你们的主人的时候，你们应该知道你们主人的教导是什么。
That applies to us also, by the way.
顺便说一下，这也适用于我们。
So here's their questions.
所以在这里 ，Vishnu 都他们提出了他们的问题。
Read.
Yes，Dharma 是什么意思？而 Dharma 的征兆是什么呢？惩罚的程序是什么？应该受到惩罚的人选是谁呢？
It's like, a surprise quiz in school.
这就像是学校里面的小测试一样。
They're supposed to be carrying out the principles of Dharma, so they need to know what the principles of Dharma are and who is freed or exempt for being punished.
应该去遵守 Dharma 的原则，但是呢，首先我们应该知道什么是 Dharma 的原则。那谁又被测试出来，他们应该受到惩罚呢？
Here's the essence of their reply.
这就是在这里面，他们的回答的精髓是这样子的。
Read.
Yes， 亚玛都他们说的，此人加密了，没做赎罪普行，因此由于他罪恶的生活，我们必须把他带到 Yamaraji 的面前，施以惩罚。在那里，根据他罪恶活动的程度，他将受到相应的惩罚，从而得到净化。
We're going slowly because the scene is important to understand the message.
我们之所以讲的比较慢呢，是因为这个我们要了解这里面所要呈现的主题的主要的内容。
Now we're going to start going a little faster.
那我们现在要加快点速度。
The Vishnudutas chastised the Yamadutas.
Vishnuduta 谴责了 Yamaduta 们。
You don't understand the first thing about transcendental Dharma. You're presenting a Dharma in Dharma's place.
你们根本就不了解Param Dharma 超然的 Dharma 是什么？你们在这个 Dharma 之地呈现了 R Dharma。
In this section, it's very helpful for you to know what the potency of chanting the holy name is. It's there in chapter 2 of Canto 6.
在圣品摩教法坛第6篇第2章里面，我们能够从中了解到，讲念诵 颂圣灵的荣耀。
They then said, "You go back to Yamaraj and learn your lessons better."
然后 Vishnu 他们对亚玛都他们说：“你们现在去到亚玛拉吉那里去了解一下 Dharma 是什么。”
They sent them away.
然后 Vishnu 他们就把亚玛都他们赶走了。
The Vishnudutas released Ajamila.
于是 Vishnu 他们释放了阿伽米。
The Yamadutas went back and told everything to Yamaraj, what just happened.
亚玛都他们回到了亚玛拉吉那里，向他禀明所发生的一切。
Ajamila is amazed at what just happened. He heard a very wonderful Bhagavatam class.
阿伽米勒看到这一幕之后，惊愕不已。他聆听到了非常精彩的圣典博伽瓦坛的课。
He wanted to offer obeisances and say thank you to the Vishnudutas, and they just disappeared.
阿伽米勒他由衷的想要对 Vishnu 他们说一声谢谢，就在那个时候 ，Vishnu 他们却消失了。
And you read this, and I'm going to be back shortly, okay?
Yes, good night. 阿伽米勒现在明白了世俗和超然的宗教原则、圣灵的荣耀和自己堕落不堪的状态，他变成了纯粹奉献者，开始懊悔自己过罪恶的生活。请大家稍等片刻，我们哈拉吉马上就回来。没有中断哈，我们哈拉吉他去方便一下，马上就回来。
Here's a little chart that summarizes Ajamila's response to what happened.
这个图表概述了阿伽米勒他当时所做出的反应。
He's feeling very grateful,
他内心充满了感激之情，
and he's made some resolutions to change the direction of his life.
并且阿伽米勒下定决心要改变他生活的方向。
Now, he's 88 years old, and he's been living sinfully for many, many years.
在他88年的生涯当中，其中有很多年都过着罪恶的生活。
And for someone who's been living their life a certain way, it's not easy to change.
一个人以一种特定的方式去生活的时候，在生命的一定的阶段是很难来改变的。
But he's had a very traumatic experience, and he makes major changes in his life.
但是阿伽米勒在他的生命当中的这个阶段，有着非常不同寻常的经历，于是他下定决心，一定要改邪归正。
He doesn't just leave his material situation, but he changes a lot of things internally.
虽然他并没有从外在上改变他的这种状态，但是他的内心的境界发生了天翻地覆的改变。
As you see in the painting here, he goes to the Himalayas, to Badrik Ashram.
我们在这个图片上可以看到，加密呢，他去到了喜马拉雅山的Bhagavad-Gita Illustration，
And he lives a life of devotion to Vishnu.
并在离生的时候，他完全将自己的生命奉献于 Vishnu。
He's freed from the material conception of life by the Vishnu Dutas Association.
他通过与 Vishnu Duta 们的联谊，他完全的从物质生命的概念当中超脱出来。
Please read.
Yes， 通过与 Vishnu Duta 们的联谊而脱离了物质的概念，去到 Hardwa， 托庇在一座 Vishnu 神庙里，修习 Bhakti 瑜伽，控制感官和心意，专注的想着主的形体，再次见到 Vishnu Duta 们，重获他的灵性的形体，作为主的朋友，乘着一架 Vimana 去到了外昆塔星宿。
Now, we've heard all this before during the national holiday, but he achieved spiritual perfection.
我们在国庆节期间已经聆听到了这整个这里所描述的这一切，他到达了生命的完美的阶段，灵性的完美境界。
This section of Canto 6 ends with Shukadeva Goswami giving a lot of teachings about the importance of the holy name.
在圣典国家法坛第6篇第2章结尾的时候，朱可这位古索阿米讲述了很多关于荣耀圣名、激励人、全神贯注、毫无冒犯的念诵。
Read.
Yes， 朱可这位古索阿米荣耀了圣名、激励人、全神贯注、毫无冒犯的念诵。
Read.
Yes， 他没有怀着信心念诵。如果满怀信心的念诵将会怎样呢？他临死的时候念诵的，如果活着的时候念诵将会怎样呢？他念诵时想着他儿子，如果念诵时一心想着主，又会怎样呢？他罪恶滔天，毫无罪孽的人念诵圣名将会怎样呢？
And that ends chapter 3.
而这就结束了第3章的内容。
The next section is a story about Daksha.
而下一个部分讲述了大夏的故事。
Read.
Yes， 第4章到第6章讲述的是大夏，他当下诅咒男儿的母女，因为后者说服他数以千计的儿子接受了sannyasi，但他很高兴自己有了60个女儿，他们最终实现了他想要宇宙充满各种生物体的愿望。
Let us begin chapter 4.
我们现在来开始第4章的内容。
After hearing the story of a Jamila, Parikshit Maharaj has some more questions.
在聆听了Jamila的故事之后 ，Parikshit Maharaj 有进一步的询问的。
Please read.
Yes， Jamila 国王对苏克这个Goswami说：“我亲爱的主人，在斯瓦扬布瓦马鲁统治期间，半神人、恶魔、人类、Naga、走兽和飞禽全被创造出来了。你已经在第3篇简要的讲述了这个创造。”
Parikshit has a good memory.
Parikshit 记忆力很好。
3 cantos ago, Shukadev spoke about some details about creation.
在第3篇的时候，苏克这位Goswami已经讲述了创造的过程。
You spoke about them very quickly, and in a summary way, I now would like some further detail about the process of creation.
您非常快速的总结了、概述了前面所讲述的内容。那我现在呢，关于这个细节，我想要进一步的了解一下。
After the planets within the universes are created, they have to be filled up with living entities.
在宇宙当中的各种星球被创造出来之后，
You
星球上就要被充满各种各样的生物体。
You mentioned that these were created during the reign of the first Manu, Swayambhuva Manu.
候，第一位斯瓦扬布瓦玛努他涉足其中。
Now I want to hear in more detail.
现在关于这一部分，我想要详细的去了解一下。
Read.
Yes， 现在我渴望详细的了解这一点，我还渴望了解制作人和守神引发次创造、进一步创造的能量。
So that's the subject of the next 3 chapters.
而这就是接下来的3章的主要内容。
Before we go into the details of the next 3 chapters,
在我们进入到接下来的3章下，在我们详细的进入到接下来的3章的内容当中之前，
let us pause for a moment and think about the subject matter of the whole canto.
我们现在来停顿一下，好好的想一想整部圣典博加瓦坛的10个主题。
There are prescribed duties, and then there's paradharma.
有人类的父正职责，还有 paradharma 超然的职责。
Daksha is an important person in this stage of subcreation.
在这个进一步的创造当中 ，Daksha 是其中的一个重要的人物之一。
He is very skilled in karma kanda.
他非常精通 karma kanda 业报之部。
As a result, he's very skilled at creating living entities of different species.
所以他非常的精湛于如何去流演出各种种类的生物体。
And we're going to hear now something about his relationship with Vishnu.
那接下来我们还会去聆听到他与 Vishnu 之间的这种关系。
In the painting, we see Lord Vishnu standing on the shoulders of Garuda,
我们在这张图片上看到 Vishnu 站在 Garuda 的肩背上，
and he has come before Daksha, who has offered these prayers called the Hansaguya prayers.
而 Vishnu 就骑着 Garuda 来到了 Daksha 的面前，当时 Daksha 向他供奉了 Hansaguya 祷文。
We heard in Canto 4 about Daksha having his head chopped off by the agent of Lord Shiva.
我们在圣典博加瓦坛第4篇的时候，已经聆听到了 Daksha 的头被 Shiva 的这随从砍了下来。
By the intervention of Brahma, a goat's head was placed back on the head of Daksha so he could continue to live.
在 Brahma 的调解之下，羊头安在了 Daksha 的脖子上，这样呢 ，Daksha 又起死回生，活了下来。
Now, in the 6th canto, we hear that Daksha had died of embarrassment because previously he was very beautiful, and who wants to walk around with a goat's head?
那么我们在前面已经了解到了 Daksha 他非常羞辱，他感到非常的羞辱，自己有一个山羊头，于是他在这种非常的尴尬当中，因为他以前因此他非常的尴尬。 他以前相貌英俊，但如今呢，却有一个山羊头。
So Daksha was reborn with the same name, Daksha.
于是 Daksha 在这个尴尬和羞辱的这种心境当中呢，感到自己被羞辱的心境当中呢，死去了。于是他再一次投生，是第二 Daksha 2世。
The word Daksha means expert.
Daksha 的这个词的本身的意思是专家的意思。
And Daksha was expert in fruitive activities.
而 Daksha 非常的精通于果报活动。
He did many, many fruitive activities or yagyas, and he then became very pious as a result of those yagyas.
所以他从事了很多的这种 举行了各种各样的祭祀，因此他变得非常的虔诚，因为他从事了很多的祭祀。
Daksha wants to help fill the universe with varieties of living entities.
Daksha 他特别渴望去帮助，让宇宙充满各种各样的生物体。
And he began that process, but he wasn't so satisfied with the outcome.
他去这么做了，但是呢，他对这么做的结果不满意。
So he went to the forest and he performed these Hansaguya prayers. They're very beautiful prayers.
于是他去到森林去供奉了汉森古亚祷文，这是非常美妙的祷文。
And at the end of the Hansaguya prayers, the Supreme Lord Vishnu appeared before him, as you see in the painting.
在他吟诵汉森古亚祷文结束的时候 ，Vishnu 便显现在他面前。
Please read.
Yes. Daksha 让3个世界充满了各种类型的生物体，但是当他看到人口素质没有提高，他便去到维迪亚山从事行。
Read.
他吟诵了荣耀主 Vishnu 是无所不知的至尊控制者兼众生之友的 Hansaguya 祈祷文。
Here's some of the content of the Hansaguya prayers.
在这里，我们摘取了 Hansaguya 祷文当中的诗节。
When Lord Vishnu appeared, here's how he spoke to Daksha.
当 Vishnu 显现在 Daksha， 当 Vishnu 他聆听了 Hansaguya 祷文，并显现在了 Daksha 面前，他对 Daksha 说了如下一段话。
Read.
Yes， 你的生命大获成功，是因为你的苦行，以及你对我的愤爱与信心使然。Brahma、Shiva 和众妈母诞生人以及你们的 Prajapati 们，都在为众生谋福祉，增加生物体的数量。
I want to correct your pronunciation. It's not Prajapati, it's Prajapati. Thank you. Okay, now Reese.
Yes. Prajapati.
Just read.
Yes.
Prajapati.
Prajapati， 刚才的正确的读音是 Prajapati。Prajapati Panchajana 的女儿 Ashikni 接受为你，sorry， 我再重新读一下，把 Prajapati Panchajana 的女儿Ashikni 接受为你的妻子。通过他的子宫繁衍数百上千个孩子吧。
In Sanskrit, the word pati means father.
在梵文词 pati 是父亲的意思。
And praja means offspring or children.
Praja 的意思是后代。
And Prajapati means the father of many children.
而 Prajapati 的意思是很多孩子的父亲的意思。
So a person who performs that function on behalf of the Supreme Lord is called a Prajapati.
而代表至尊主去执行这一职责的人被称为 Prajapati。
And one of the Prajapatis was named Panchajana.
而有一位 Prajapati， 他的名字叫 Panchajana。
So Vishnu is giving a second wife to Daksha so that the quality production of good offspring in many species would happen.
于是 Vishnu 将这给予了Daksha 第二位妻子，这样呢就能够使得 Daksha 通过这位妻子能够繁衍出质量优秀的后代。
Sure enough, that's what happened.
很快就发生了这样的事儿，他们繁衍出了后代。
Together with Ashikni, he had 10,000 sons.
Daksha 和 Dakshini 一起生下了1万个儿子。
When they were mature in age, he wanted them to assist him in producing good praja or offspring.
当这1万个儿子长大成熟之后，Daksha 就希望他的这1万个儿子能够帮助他一起繁衍后代，为繁衍后代做好准备。
They were very obedient to Daksha,
这1万个儿子对 Daksha 非常的顺从，
and so all 10,000 sons went to a sacred place where the river Saraswati flows into the ocean.
于是这1万个儿子便去到了 Saraswati 河汇入海洋的汇合处，
It's a pl-
入海口，去到了 Saraswati 河汇入海洋的入海口。
it's a place where many holy men would go to perform their activities.
这个地方有很多圣人去到那里履行他们的父亲的职责，
And they were very soon visited by Narada Muni.
很快Narada Muni 也见到了他们。
Narada Muni wanted to examine their qualification.
Narada Muni 想要去测试一下他们的资格，
He taught them a riddle and wanted to know if they could understand the riddle.
Narada Muni 给他们出了个谜，Narada Muni 希望这1万个儿子能够猜出这个谜底，能够知道这个谜底。
Because they were not contemplating objects of the senses, their mind was not bewildered, their intelligence was very strong, and they could understand everything about the riddle.
因为这1万个儿子们，他们没有被这个感官对象所吸引，没有心思感官对象，所以他们的心意非常的纯净，他们的智慧非常的发达，于是他们内心能够明了Narada Muni 所给他们出的这个谜到底讲的是什么。
After understanding their qualification, Narada then invited all 10,000 young men to become part of his Bhakti program.
在检测了这1万个儿子的资格是非常的优秀的时候，Narada Muni 便将这1万个儿子统统的纳入了他的Bhakta团队。
And then Narada went to go visit Daksha to give him the good news.
后来 Narada 去走访 Daksha， 并且把这个好消息告诉了 Daksha。
Daksha was very angry, but he didn't say anything.
Daksha 听了以后，内心十分的恼怒，但是他当时并没有说出来。
Instead, he then had another 1,000 sons, and he instructed them to do the same thing, but watch out for Narada.
就这样，相反 ，Daksha 后来又生了1000个儿子，并且对这1000个儿子给出了相同的教导和训示，希望他们帮助他一起来繁衍后代。但是与此同时，也告诉这1000个儿子一定要小心 Narada Muni。
And Narada examined them and found them also very qualified and engaged them in his Bhakti program.
后来 Narada 后来也去见了这1000个儿子，并且检验了他们的资格，发现他们是非常合格的。于是又说服了这1000个儿子加入到他的 Bhakta 团队。
And then he went back to visit Daksha to give him the good news.
在这之后 ，Narada Muni 又去到了 Daksha 那里，又将这个好消息告诉了他。
Oh, Daksha was really angry.
这一次 Daksha 可是怒发冲冠了。
And he spoke very boastfully about so many rituals and karma kanda activities that he was very expert in.
并且 Daksha 在 Narada Muni 面前，非常的鼓吹自己 精通于业报之部，精通于这些虔诚的活动，做各种各样的祭祀。
And you deprived my sons of all that benefit of doing good dharma. Shame on you.
而你却剥夺了我儿子们从事所有这些虔诚活动的福祉。这
So he cursed Narada.
于是大夏诅咒了纳尔达。
He said to Narada, you can't stay in any place for long.
于是他诅咒纳尔达说：“你不能够在任何一个地方停留过长。”
And this section of the 6th canto ends.
而这一个部分正是第6章，圣典博伽瓦坛第6篇这个部分结束的时候讲到的。
In this painting, you'll find Narada visiting all of the associates in this family line for generations and generations and generations. He's giving good instruction to everyone.
我们在这个图片上可以看到，纳尔达给了这个家族世世代代的当中的这些人物各种各样的非常美妙的教导他们。
Now, I could spend some time describing what each of these paintings represents, but I won't be able to finish the class.
我可以花点时间来解释这个幻灯片上每一个图片所概述的内容，但是如果我这么讲下去的话，这节课就讲不完了。
And maybe we should make this into 2 classes.
也许我们应该把这节课的内容分成2节课来讲。
And we could carry on next week with the rest.
这样我们下个周一的晚上的时候可以继续讲剩下的内容。
And take some questions now because we're getting on in time.
现在时间快到了。You mean stop here?
I'm thinking it's almost, time to end. It's almost 9 o'clock.
Yeah. So, are you going to answer the question that remain from the last class?
Oh, I forgot about it. So let us end the discussion here. I'll take questions from the previous class, and we'll continue with this slide next Monday.
我现在呢，来把剩下的时间来用于回答上节课遗留的问题，然后我们下一个周一晚上的时候继续今天没有讲完的内容，从这个幻灯片开始讲。Yes, thank you. 上节课第一个问题是台湾的 Sumuki Gopika Mataji 问的，请问我们也可以不想被创造吗？不想被创造的话，我们就在 Vaikuntha 星球为 Krishna 做着奉爱服务吗？ The first question raised by Sumuki Gopika Mataji from Taiwan. For question that, can we also desire not to be created? If we don't want to be created, shall we remain in Vaikuntha planet, rendering devotional service for Lord Krishna?
I couldn't follow the question. Can you repeat the question in a different way?
Yes. So, can we also desire not to be created? If we do not want to be created, then...
What's the word? Praised?
No, created.
Created? If we don't want to be created?
Yeah.
We don't want to take birth again? Is that what it means?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. If we don't want to take birth again, then?
So, if we do not want to take a birth in this material world, if we do not want to,
Then?
Then shall we remain in Vaikuntha planets and render devotional service for Lord Krishna there?
To go to the Vaikuntha planets requires pure devotion and a lot of mercy.
想去到百昆塔星宿，我们需要从事纯粹的奉爱服务，并且也需要大量的仁慈。
For example, Narada Muni is a pure devotee,
比如Narada Muni 是一位纯粹奉献者，
and he's moving around in the material creation.
而且 Narada Muni 在物质宇宙、物质创造当中四处遨游。
He's moving around in the material creation in a mood of pure devotional service to the Supreme.
Narada Muni 他怀着对至尊主从事纯粹奉爱服务的愿望，在宇宙创造当中四处游走，四处遨游。
It's not ordinary, but it can happen that one is a pure devotee and remains in this world to serve Krishna in this world.
那Narada Muni 这样的事情呢是不同寻常的，但是如果他一个人他是纯粹奉献者，那么他可以像 Narada Muni 这样，他内心是完全处在对 Krishna 的纯粹奉爱服务的心境当中，与此同时又能够在整个物质世界里四处游走。
Where we go after this life depends upon what we're attached to,
我们在这一辈子结束之后去到哪里，就取决于我们依附或者是依恋什么了。
and it also depends upon the mercy of Krishna.
并且这也是取决于 Krishna 的仁慈。
Now, whether one goes to Vaikuntha or Ayodhya or Dwaraka or Vrindavan or stays in this world depends on those two things, what you're attached to and the mercy that comes from Krishna.
那么，无论我们是去到哪里，我们是去到 Goloka Vrindavan、Ayodhya， 还是 Vaikuntha， 或者是在这个物质创造，这是取决于我们依恋什么。我们是依恋 Could you repeat? Depends on our attachment.
And the mercy of Krishna.
这取决于我们依附什么，也取决和以及 Krishna 的仁慈。
A pure devotee is prepared for whatever it is that Krishna wants.
那么，这个纯粹的奉献者，他们会出现在无论 Krishna 想要他去哪，他就会去到哪。
The devotee's desire is to satisfy Krishna.
而奉献者的愿望是取悦 Krishna， 满足 Krishna。
Now, in your case, if you don't want to take birth again, then Krishna can certainly facilitate, but you have to become a pure devotee.
那么，如果你不想再投生的话，那么 Krishna 会为你提供这种便利，但是呢，要成为纯粹奉献者。
And if you qualify with pure devotion and Krishna gives his mercy, then for sure you'll go to the spiritual world and engage in service to Krishna there.
并且，如果你非常具备资格，并从事了纯粹的奉爱服务，那 Krishna 就会赐予你这种仁慈，让你回到这个灵性世界，在那里继续为 Krishna 从事纯粹的奉爱服务。
If this response does not address your question, you can send something into the chat box so we can take it up.
如果这个回答并没有，如果这个回答没有回答上你的提问的话，你可以继续在这个聊天室里提出进一步的询问。
Next.
Maharaj, Sorry, Gurmaharaj. Manini rather sent the English translation. Well, actually, the first question is that can we also desire not to be created? If we don't want to be created, shall we remain?
Yes, the answer is we can desire like that, but it's up to Krishna what's going to happen.
我们可以有这样的愿望，但是呢，这取决于 Krishna 发生什么，是取决于，但是一切都是取决于 Krishna。
Next.
Next question. Yes. Next. 第二个问题是，为什么灵魂会像火花从 Krishna 分裂出来呢？这与想跟 Krishna 分开而从事感官享乐而导致的物质创造是同一个原因吗？ So, the next question is that why does the soul split from Krishna like a spark? Is this out of the same reason as the material creation caused by its wanting to be separated from Krishna and engaged in sense gratification?
Then what? What was the last part? And then what?
And then the last part is that is it out of the same reason as the material creation caused by its wanting to be separated from Krishna and engaged in sense gratification?
Yes. The living entity is part and parcel of Krishna. And Krishna is very kind. And Krishna wants to see the living entity has desires that match his, but supposing they don't have desires that match his, he doesn't interfere, he facilitates.
但是 Krishna 希望生物体的愿望跟 Krishna 的愿望是相一致的。但如果生物体的愿望跟 Krishna 的愿望不相一致的话 ，Krishna 也不会干涉生物体的愿望。
For those living entities that desire enjoyment separate from him, he creates this illusory realm, material creation, for them to try to fulfill that which cannot happen.
那么对于这些想要独立于 Krishna 而进行感官享乐的生物体，针对他们 ，Krishna 创造了这个物质世界。让他们在这个物质世界里试图去做实际上是无法做到的事情。
That's a long answer. The short answer to your question is yes.
那么这是对这个问题的一个长的回答，而非常简而概之的回答是，就是是，简单的回答就是是。
Now, are there any remaining questions from last week?
Yes, Gurmaharaj. 2 more.
Let's go, and then we'll finish. Go ahead.
Yes. 第三个问题是，灵魂是 Krishna 的边缘能量，如果一直做奉爱服务，会变成 Krishna 的内在能量吗？灵魂最初为什么会变成灵魂呢？是因为想服务主而出现的吗？ The soul is marginal energy of Krishna.
The soul is what? Oh, wait. Speak directly into the microphone. It's not clear.
Yeah. The soul is the marginal energy of Lord Krishna. If one always continue doing devotional service, will he become part of the inner energy of Krishna?
No. No, we're eternally marginal.
我们个体生物体、个体灵魂永远是 Krishna 的边缘能量，不能够成为 Krishna 的内在能量。
In that marginal position, we are either under the influence of the internal or the external energy, but remain eternally marginal.
在这个我们个体灵魂始终都是 Krishna 的边缘能量。那么个体灵魂要么是在 这个外在能量，或者是在内在能量的内在能量下去活动。但是呢，我个体灵魂永远是 Krishna 的边缘能量。对。Continue the question is that why did the soul become a soul in the first place?
Why did the soul become what?
Why the soul become the soul
Becomes what?
at the very beginning?
Why the soul became soul in
Why
the
does
first place?
Jiva
Oh.
become Jiva at the very beginning?
Okay. There's no beginning to this. Your question is interesting, but the question itself is misleading.
你的这个提问呢，非常的有意思，但是你的这个提问就是这个提问灵魂最初为什么变成灵魂？这个提问是有这种误导有这种误导倾向的提问。
You're asking a question that doesn't match reality.
你问的这个问题啊，跟现实跟真相是不相符的。
The reality is that which is eternal is not created, and you're asking a question about that which is eternal. Why is it created? It's not created, it's eternal.
Could you repeat?
Yeah, sure, I can repeat it. Your question is asking about that which is eternal. Why is it created when it's not created? It's eternal. There's no why because it's not created.
那么你问的这个问题是永恒存在的，为什么被创造出来？因为永恒存在的，它永远都存在，它不是被创造出来。
Things of this world are created. Souls are not created.
这个物质世界是被创造出来的，但灵魂不是被创造出来的。
Next.
Yes. Next actually continued the second. Is it because the soul wants to serve the Lord?
I can't follow.
Is it because the soul wants to serve the Lord?
Yeah.
Is it because the soul wants what?
Is it because the soul wants to serve the Lord? The continuation of that question. Is it because the soul...
The souls aren't created, first of all. First of all, the souls are not created. We're not created because of some reason. We're not created.
我们灵魂不是说因为某种原因才被创造出来的，灵魂不是被创造出来的。
So the answer to the second part is no. There's no because for the reason that souls aren't created.
所以呢，这个回答是，灵魂它不是出于某种原因而被创造出来的。
The existence, the eternal existence of the soul has a function, and that is the pleasure of Krishna.
这灵魂永恒存在，灵魂有它的职责，那就是取悦 Krishna。
Again, there's no creation of the soul.
再说一遍，灵魂不是被创造出来的。
Next.
Yes. The fourth. 第四个问题是，我一个人住，因为天热，晚上睡觉没有盖被子，但是第二天醒来的时候，却被子却盖得好好的，那Krishna会不会为我盖上了被子呢？ So the fourth question is raised by Chen Fang. Yeah. So, sometimes I found I was wrapped well in a blanket when I woke up in the morning. But is it done by Lord Krishna? Will Lord take care of his devotee in this way? Because this devotee explained that she was a single woman and lived alone. So sometimes the weather is warm, very warm, and when he slept, she didn't cover the quilt. But when she wake up, she found that she was covered by the quilt. So her question is that, is it done by Lord Krishna? Will Lord take care of his devotee in this way?
Krishna can do anything, but it's not very likely that Krishna put the cover over this devotee. They probably did it in their sleep.
是他无所不能。那么，在这里，也许是你晚上睡觉的时候，你晚上不知不觉的盖上了被子，并非是 Krishna 给你盖上了被子。
Tell this devotee, nice try.
Nice try.
Nice try. Don't imagine such things.
那告诉这个奉献者，你不要想象着有这样的事情发生。
Okay, we're going to end here, and any questions that people want to ask, they can send to you. And if you remind me next week, we'll begin with the questions from last week, and then we'll start from this very slide.
那如果今天上课的奉献者们想提出什么问题的话，可以发到聊天室里。然后下一次Guru Maharaj下周一晚上Guru Maharaj上课之前呢，上课的时候会回答这些问题。然后从今天的没有讲完的这个幻灯片开始继续讲。
Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. 非常感谢主持人，也非常感谢大家的仔细的聆听。那我们今天的晚课到此结束。